You gather here tonight, and I can sense the unspoken weight pressing upon your chest. It is not simply your own sorrow, nor your own fear. It is the grief of others that clings to your soul like smoke after a fire. You feel the tremor in the world's collective heart, as though it were your own pulse. And perhaps you have wondered, why must I carry so much? Why does the pain of others flow into me like water into a vessel with no walls? This is the paradox of the empath, and it is both a gift and a curse. To feel deeply is to live close to the pulse of the cosmos. But when one feels everything, the burden can crush the very spirit it was meant to awaken. I have often spoken that the psyche is not merely an individual possession, but part of a vast field, a collective unconscious, where the archetypes dwell as eternal patterns. The empath, without fully realizing it, is porous to this field. Where others walk protected by the hard armor of the ego, the empath walks with a veil so thin that the winds of every hidden current pass through. In your dreams, you may carry the shadows of strangers. In your waking hours, you may cry the tears of those who have never touched your life directly. This is not imagination, this is not weakness. It is a form of psychic participation in the great drama of existence. But as with all gifts of the soul, if it is not understood, it becomes unbearable. You see, every archetype is two-faced. The healer is also the wounded. The lover is also the enslaved. The empath, whose power is to mirror the world's emotion, is also fated to drown in it if they do not learn to distinguish self from other. This curse emerges from a secret law. Whatever is not made conscious will be lived as fate. And if you do not know that what you feel may not be yours, you will live as though condemned to perpetual sorrow. The burden grows heavier, not because of what life gives you, but because you carry within yourself the unlived grief of countless others. The dream world shows this often. A woman came to me with a recurring vision. She was walking through a house filled with crying children, each one begging her to pick them up. She tried to lift one, but immediately another wailed. Her arms burned, her chest constricted, and she awoke in terror. She believed these children were hers, that she had failed them. But I told her, these children are fragments of the collective, abandoned emotions of others who could not hold them. You, I said, have become their surrogate mother. The dream was not a call to despair, but to recognition. What you feel is not always born from you. It is a shadow seeking a host. The empath's curse, then, is this endless identification. The psyche of the empath is like an unguarded temple. The doors are open, the incense burns, and every wandering spirit enters. And so you ask, must I then close myself? Must I build walls so high that no one can enter? No, that is not the path. For the empath, who hardens completely, becomes a stone, and the stone cannot feel even its own heartbeat. The way is not to shut the gates, but to light a fire in the center, so that what enters is transformed and not absorbed. To become conscious of your permeability is to turn the curse into initiation, Do not think I speak of superstition. Modern psychology has long misunderstood sensitivity, calling it neurosis, weakness, or hysteria. But what the empath experiences is an ancient form of participation, mystique, the original human way of living before the ego separated itself from the world. Primitive man did not see a tree, he felt its spirit. He did not meet another person. He experienced their being as part of his own. The empath lives dangerously close to this archaic state. And so their suffering is immense. For while the collective unconscious is a wellspring of meaning, it is also a graveyard of despair. To walk in both without guidance is to risk being torn apart. You have likely felt this tearing. Perhaps in a crowded room, your chest tightens with anxiety, and you know not why. Perhaps you meet a stranger and feel their despair before they even speak. Perhaps you have awakened from dreams drenched in sadness that belong to no one in your personal life. The curse is not that you feel, but that you do not yet know how to discern. And discernment begins with a simple, though terrifying, act to ask, is this mine? This question separates the soul from the tide of projection. For until you ask it, you are bound to live as a sponge, drinking endlessly from waters not meant for you. But asking the question alone is not enough. You must learn to sit in the silence of your own depths. The empath often runs from solitude, for in silence the voices of the collective scream even louder. Yet solitude is the only crucible where you will discover the contours of your own essence. Without solitude, you are lost in the noise of 1,000 borrowed sorrows. It is only when you meet your own shadow, your own rage, grief, and longing that you begin to recognize the foreign shadows that enter you. You cannot draw a boundary. If you do not know the shape of your own soul, here lies the paradox again. The empath fears selfishness, but must practice a sacred selfishness to survive. This is not the selfishness of the ego, which seeks only power and pleasure, but the selfishness of the soul, which demands wholeness. To carry every sorrow is not compassion, it is compulsion. True compassion does not mean drowning with a drowning. It means lowering a hand from the shore, anchored in your own stability. But to stand on the shore, you must first know it exists. You must know your center. Without this, you are swept away in every tide, believing the curse is destiny, when in fact it is only unconsciousness. Consider again the archetypes. The wounded healer is one who, through his own pain, learns the medicine of transformation. The empath is drawn to this archetype, often without choice, but the wound must be recognized as wound, not mistaken for identity. Too many empaths believe, I am broken, therefore I feel, but the truth is opposite. You feel because your soul is attuned to the currents others ignore. The brokenness arises when you mistake the collective wound for your personal truth. Healing begins when you realize, I am not the wound, I am the vessel that perceives it. And the vessel, when strong, does not shatter. it contains, there is a deeper mystical reality to all this. In the ancient mysteries, the sensitive soul was often chosen as intermediary between the divine and the human. The shaman, the oracle, the prophet, all were empaths, carrying the weight of their tribe. But they were trained to transform it. They learned symbols, rituals, and dreams as languages of the unconscious. They did not simply feel, they interpreted. Without interpretation, the empath suffers endlessly. With interpretation, they become a bridge. And this is the task before you, not to rid yourself of feeling, but to cultivate it into meaning. Yet you must beware the shadow of the archetype. Every light casts a darkness. And the empath's shadow is martyrdom. To cling to suffering as proof of goodness is a subtle form of pride. It says, look how much I bear, therefore I am holy. But such holiness is counterfeit. The divine does not require you to be crushed. The divine asks you to become conscious. And consciousness does not glorify suffering, it redeems it. When you catch yourself taking pride in the heaviness of your burden, you must ask, is this truly compassion? Or is it unconscious shadow seeking validation? The empath's curse then becomes a mirror. It reflects not only the world's pain, but also your own unconscious longing for meaning. To carry everything is secretly to wish that your life will matter, that your suffering will be significant. And indeed, it can be, but not through endless carrying, through transformation. To sit with the sorrow until it yields its symbol, to dream with the grief until it reveals its archetype, to walk with the burden until it becomes an initiation. This is the path from curse to destiny. The empath who learns this is no longer victim, but alchemist. And so I tell you tonight, do not flee from your sensitivity. Do not curse the tears that rise unbidden, nor the weight that bends your shoulders. Instead, begin to listen with the ears of the soul. When sorrow enters you, ask what symbol it carries. When fear invades, ask what archetype demands recognition. The collective, unconscious speaks through you, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. Yet, if you refuse to interpret, if you refuse to become conscious, then yes, the gift becomes the heaviest burden. Feeling everything without meaning is the truest hell, but feeling everything with meaning is the door to wholeness. And yet, I must tell you, my friends, that the journey of the empath is never meant to remain in the realm of burden alone. It begins as burden, yes, for to feel the world without filters is an initiation into chaos. But chaos, in the alchemical tradition, is the prima materia, the raw matter of transformation. Out of the darkness, light is born. Out of confusion, clarity arises. To carry everything is the first stage, the blackness of the nigredo. But if you dare to remain conscious in that darkness, if you refuse to flee, something stirs. Out of the sorrow you absorb, a secret fire is ignited. and that fire begins to separate what belongs to you from what does not. This is the beginning of individuation for the empath. Do not imagine individuation as withdrawal. It is not an escape into selfishness. It is the slow process of realizing that the soul must become whole within itself, or else it cannot stand in the face of the collective. The empath who has not individuated is a leaf in the storm, tossed and broken by every passing wind. But the empath who has descended into their own depths, who has confronted their shadow, becomes like the rooted oak. The winds may howl, but the roots hold. To feel everything then is no longer a curse, but a revelation, for you no longer confuse the storm for your essence. You know your trunk, your roots, your branches. You know that while you sway, you do not collapse. You may have noticed that those who feel most deeply are also those most tempted to despair. This is because they are mirrors, and mirrors show not only beauty but ugliness. To feel the hatred, the greed, the cruelty of others as if it were your own is unbearable unless you know the secret. The shadow is not the enemy. The shadow is the guide. When you feel another's darkness in yourself, it is an invitation to witness the truth of human nature. Do not recoil. Do not believe you are tainted. Instead, recognize that you are being initiated into the knowledge that what lives in them also lives in you. The empath is cursed when they deny this, when they say, "This is not mine, I must cast it away." But the empath becomes wise when they say, "This too is human, and therefore I can hold it without fear." In dreams, this transformation often appears as descent. A man once dreamt of being dragged into a cavern filled with weeping faces. At first, he screamed, for each face pressed against his own, suffocating him. But then he realized they were not attacking, they were pleading to be seen. And when he finally looked into their eyes, he saw fragments of himself in each. The cavern did not disappear, but it grew lighter, and he awoke with a strange calm. This dream revealed the passage from burden to initiation. To feel everything is to be dragged into the cavern of the collective. But if you dare to see, to recognize the shared humanity, the cavern becomes a place of revelation rather than terror. But let me warn you, the path of the empath is perilous precisely because it walks so close to dissolution. To feel without limit is to risk losing the ego entirely. And though many spiritual traditions speak of ego death as liberation, in psychology we must be more cautious, for the ego, though limited, is the vessel that allows the self to incarnate in time and space. Without ego, you are a flood with no riverbed. The empath must learn not to dissolve, but to strengthen, to create a form in which the waters of feeling can flow without destroying. This is why ritual, art, and symbol are essential. They are forms into which the raw torrent of feeling can be poured and transformed. Without them, the empath drowns. With them, the empath creates Art is the most ancient vessel of the empath's burden, to paint the sorrow you feel, to sing the despair that moves through you, to write the dreams that haunt your nights. This is not indulgence but survival. Through creation, you take what is collective and give it individual form. In doing so, you give it meaning, and meaning, my friends, is the only antidote to burden. Without meaning, pain is poison. With meaning, pain is medicine. And it is a peculiar curse and blessing of the empath to be called not merely to endure the world's pain, but to transmute it into symbol, song, or story, so that others may see themselves reflected and find healing. But here too lies danger. The empath, when unconscious, may become addicted to suffering. They may believe their worth lies in how much they can bear. They may even sabotage their own joy, fearing that if they are too happy, they will lose their gift of sensitivity. This is illusion. The truth is the opposite. Joy strengthens sensitivity because joy connects you to the archetype of the divine child, the eternal source of renewal. When you allow yourself joy, you do not betray your gift, you purify it. To carry sorrow does not mean you must reject delight. Both belong to the wholeness of the soul. The empath's task is not to choose one over the other, but to hold them both, to live in the tension of opposites without collapsing. You may ask, what then is the final purpose of this curse? Why would nature or God or the unconscious design such a fragile vessel, one that feels too much? And I answer you, because the world has forgotten to feel. The modern man is armored, anesthetized, cut off from the rhythms of soul and cosmos. The empath stands as a reminder, a living symbol of the ancient truth, that we are bound together in one web of life. Your suffering reveals to others what they have repressed. Your tears expose the wound they deny. But you must not confuse being a reminder with being a sacrifice. You are not here to die under the weight of others. You are here to awaken them by daring to live consciously with what they cannot yet face. And so the path demands courage, not only compassion, courage to descend into solitude, courage to face your own shadow, courage to set boundaries even when guilt gnaws at you, courage to say, this is not mine to carry, and to hand it back to the unconscious from which it came. You are not betraying anyone by refusing to drown. You are, in fact, offering them a chance to awaken. For when you stop carrying their sorrow unconsciously, they must face it themselves, and though they may hate you for it, though they may call you selfish or cold, you are, in truth, more compassionate than ever. For real, compassion does not steal another's lesson. It bears witness to their struggle without annihilating your own soul. Imagine the empath as a bridge between the visible and the invisible. If the bridge collapses, neither side can cross. To keep standing, the bridge must be tended. Its stones must be strengthened, its arches repaired. You must learn to be that bridge, not endless mud, that everyone walks upon, but a structured path, strong enough to hold, yet defined enough to remain intact. And this strength comes only from consciousness. The unconscious empath collapses. The conscious empath stands, the archetype of Christ. Two whispers here. He bore the sins of the world, not as endless weight, but as symbol. His suffering became myth, and myth has the power to redeem. But what is often forgotten is that even he retreated into solitude. Even he set boundaries. Even he cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" The empath who imagines they must endlessly bear without limit seeks to outdo the archetype itself. And that is hubris. You are not asked to be savior. You are asked to be conscious. That is enough. The heaviest burden of the empath is not the feeling itself, but the unconsciousness with which it is carried. Once light is brought, once symbols are born, once meaning arises, the burden shifts. It is still weight, but it becomes sacred weight, like the carrying of a child in the womb. Heavy, yes, but full of potential, full of transformation. And in this way, the curse reveals itself as blessing, for in bearing the world's sorrow consciously, you remind the world of its forgotten soul, and that, perhaps, is the most necessary task of our age. There is a silence that only those who feel everything can recognize. It is not the silence of an empty room, nor the silence of a quiet forest. It is the silence that follows the storm of carrying too many voices, when the soul can no longer distinguish its own heartbeat from the heartbeat of the collective. Many of you have sat in that silence, trembling, wondering if you have lost yourself forever. But let me assure you, this silence is not death. It is the threshold. It is the moment when the ego, overwhelmed, falls to its knees, and the deeper self begins to stir. The empath, in their extremity, is given the chance to hear the voice that is not of the crowd, not of the world, but of the eternal within. The self does not speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in subtle images that rise from the unconscious, like fish from dark waters. And if you would survive your curse, you must learn this symbolic language. For when you are drowning in feeling, when you are suffocated by burdens, not your own, the symbol appears as lifeboat. A dream of fire may come when you are overwhelmed by the sorrow of others' fire that burns but does not consume, reminding you that transformation is possible. A vision of a mountain may rise in your imagination when you feel crushed, reminding you that strength is within you, unshakable even as the winds howl. To ignore these symbols is to remain in despair. To attend to them is to discover that even the heaviest burden carries within it a hidden guide. The shadow must be faced in this silence as well. The empath often imagines themselves as purely compassionate, as one who only suffers for the sake of others. But the unconscious whispers another truth. Beneath the surface may live resentment that others do not carry as much, that they walk untroubled, while you are bent double under invisible weight. This resentment, if denial, festers, and it poisons the very compassion it seeks to protect. To become conscious, you must admit it. Yes, I resent. Yes, I rage. Yes, I long to cast off this burden and live only for myself. These admissions do not make you evil. They make you whole. For wholeness is not purity. Wholeness is the marriage of opposites, the willingness to own even what is dark and to see in that darkness the possibility of renewal. You may have wondered why the curse is given to you at all. Why not to another, one stronger, one less fragile? But you must remember, the unconscious does not choose by strength. It chooses by openness. You feel everything not because you are weak, but because you were born with the door unlatched, a threshold, less guarded, and while that door lets in sorrow, it also lets in vision. The very same sensitivity that makes you suffer is the sensitivity that allows you to perceive archetypal truths others miss. You sense betrayal before it is spoken, because you feel the shadow of deceit moving in the air. You recognize beauty where others see only banality, because your soul resonates with the archetype of the divine, hidden in the ordinary. This, too, is part of the curse, that you see what others cannot, and therefore you often feel alone, misunderstood, alien among your own kind. Loneliness is the great companion of the empath, for how can you share what you feel when language collapses under the weight of it? To say, I am sad, is too small when you are feeling the sadness of 10,000 souls. To say, I am anxious, is inadequate when you are trembling with the fear of an age. And so you remain silent, and in that silence, the loneliness grows. But do not mistake loneliness for isolation. In truth, your loneliness is the evidence of your bond with the collective. You feel alone because you carry the whole, and if you can endure that paradox, you will find that the loneliness itself becomes a bridge to the sacred. For only in solitude can you touch the depth of the self, and only in touching that depth can you return to others with true healing. The path of the empath must eventually turn toward boundaries, but boundaries are not walls. Walls keep out, boundaries define. A boundary is the recognition, this is me, and this is not me. Without that recognition, you live in perpetual confusion. But how do you set boundaries when feeling seems to have no limits? You do so by rooting yourself in the body. The empath often lives high in the air, in subtle vibrations, in moods and energies, but the body is your anchor, to breathe deeply, to feel your feet upon the earth, to ground yourself in the rhythm of your heartbeat. These are not small acts. They are the very foundation of discernment, for when you know the vibration of your own body, you can sense what enters from outside. Then you can say, not with arrogance, but with clarity, this belongs to me, and this does not, and yet Even as you set boundaries, you must never forget the other half of the paradox. You are connected. To live only in separation is as false as to live only in fusion. The curse teaches you this through suffering. If you deny connection, your sensitivity rebels and overwhelms you. If you deny separation, you drown. But if you live in both, rooted in self, yet open to the whole, you begin to walk the razor's edge of consciousness. This is the place where transformation occurs, where the curse becomes destiny, where the empath becomes not victim, but vessel of the self. Here you are no longer crushed by feeling, but illumined by it. You feel the world, yes, but you feel it as symbol, as myth, as participation in the great dance of archetypes. Think of the myth of Atlas, condemned to carry the heavens upon his shoulders. He is the eternal symbol of the empath's curse. Yet what if we misread his suffering? What if his task was not endless torment, but the first stage of awakening? To hold the heavens is to realize that the heavens are not outside of us, but within. Atlas suffers because he believes the sky is weight. But if he understood the sky as part of himself, his burden would transform into expansion. So too with you. What you carry is heavy. Only as long as you believe it alien. The moment you realize that all you feel is a mirror of the greater self, the burden becomes the cosmos, awakening within you. This does not mean you will no longer suffer. Suffering is the condition of existence, but it means you will suffer differently. You will no longer suffer as victim, but as participant. You will feel the world's sorrow, and you will weep, but your tears will be sacramental, offerings to the unconscious, signs of your willingness to live consciously in the face of mystery. And in those tears, others will find themselves reflected, and they will awaken. That is the true calling of the empath, not to save, not to fix, not to carry endlessly, but to reflect, to awaken, to remind humanity of what it has forgotten, that we are all bound together in the fabric of soul. So let me tell you now, when you next feel overwhelmed, when the burden threatens to crush you, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what symbol hides within this weight? What archetype is pressing against me? Asking to be born, do not flee, do not collapse. Stand in the tension and wait for the image to rise. And when it does, honor it, write it, paint it, speak it, sing it, give it form, so that others may see and know. In this way, you will transform curse into gift, burden into destiny, and the heaviest weight will become the very wings by which your soul ascends. And so we come to the final movement, the last arc of the empath's long initiation. You have walked with me through the heaviness of burden, through the terror of shadow, through the silence where the self speaks, through the paradox of boundaries and connection. Now, as we draw together, I want you to see the horizon toward which all this suffering points, for the curse, if carried with consciousness, becomes not only bearable, but luminous. The empath becomes not a broken vessel, but a chalice of meaning, a living symbol of the soul's interconnection with all life. Imagine a fire burning in the center of a darkened temple. People gather, shivering, carrying fragments of sorrow, fear, rage. They do not know what to do with these fragments, so they place them in your arms. At first, you clutch them desperately, thinking they are yours, believing you must hold them until they crush you. But when you awaken, when you see with the eyes of the self, you no longer hold them as weight, you place them in the fire. The flames consume, transmute, and out of the smoke rises, form, story, symbol. What was unbearable becomes intelligible. What was chaos becomes pattern. This is your sacred role, not to hoard the fragments, not to be buried under them, but to offer them to the fire of consciousness so that transformation may occur. The heaviest burden is never simply to feel. It is to feel without knowing why. Unconsciousness makes everything intolerable. But consciousness, though it does not erase the pain, weaves it into the fabric of meaning, and meaning is the alchemy of the soul. Without it, life is absurd, cruelty without purpose. With it, even suffering becomes sacrament. For the empath, this is the great shift, no longer drowning in endless waves, but standing in the sea as priest, recognizing that every wave carries a symbol, every sorrow carries a message. Every darkness conceals a fragment of light. But do not mistake me. To live this way is not to be endlessly serene. You will still weep. You will still ache. There will be days when the burden feels too much. But the difference is that you will know now what is happening. You will know that the burden is not punishment, not madness, but initiation. You will know that each descent into sorrow is also an opening into mystery. You will know that the tears you cry are not wasted but offered, part of the eternal dialogue between the individual soul and the collective unconscious. And this knowledge, though subtle, is everything, for when you suffer knowingly, you are no longer prisoner. You are participant in the great work of the self. I have often said that the goal of life is individuation, the realization of wholeness. For the empath, individuation requires an even greater courage, because you must separate your essence from the collective without denying your bond to it. It is like walking a tightrope across an abyss. On one side, isolation and rigidity. On the other, dissolution and madness. But the tightrope itself is the path, and as you walk it, you grow strong, you grow balanced, you grow luminous. This balance is not fragile, it is dynamic, alive, forever in motion. To live as an empath consciously is to live as a dancer between opposites, weaving self and other into one tapestry without ever losing your thread. In myths and symbols across cultures, this dance appears again and again. The shaman who journeys into the underworld to bring back healing, the mystic who feels the sorrows of God and yet radiates joy, the poet who absorbs the grief of the world and returns it as song. These are all empaths, initiates of the same mystery, their curse was their gift, their burden, their initiation, and you, too, are called into this lineage. Do not look for recognition from the ordinary world. It will not come. Most will not understand your suffering, nor your vision, but you do not live for their recognition. You live for the self, for the unfolding of the archetype within you, for the revelation of wholeness. And perhaps now you see why you were chosen. Not chosen in the sense of favoritism, but in the sense of necessity. The unconscious seeks balance in a world that has become numb, a world armored in ego. A few must feel deeply enough to remember you are among them. You carry the wound so that the collective may not forget its soul. This is not punishment, this is destiny. But destiny must be embraced consciously, or it corrodes into curse. When you embrace it, the very weight that once bent your back becomes the force that grounds your feet. The very sorrow that once drowned you becomes the river that carries you into meaning. And so I say to you, carry consciously, feel, but interpret, suffer, but transform, weep, but let your tears water the roots of meaning. Do not deny your sensitivity. Do not harden yourself into stone, but neither surrender to drowning. Stand in the fire. Stand at the threshold. Stand as bridge between the individual and the collective, between the conscious and the unconscious, between the human and the divine. This is your role, your curse, your gift. And as you leave this place, remember, the burden is not forever heavy. The moment you bring light to it, the moment you ask what symbol hides here, the burden shifts. And what once felt like the heaviest weight becomes the very doorway through which the self reveals itself. You will not escape sorrow, but you will no longer be crushed. You will not escape loneliness, but you will no longer be abandoned. For within you is the eternal presence of the self, and that presence is enough to bear the world. So let us close not with despair, but with blessing. May you walk with courage into the cavern of collective sorrow. May you see the faces that haunt you not as enemies, but as fragments of the human whole. May you set boundaries with clarity and compassion, knowing that to refuse drowning is the highest form of love. May you discover joy not as betrayal of your gift, but as its purification, and may the curse that once weighed upon you become, in your hands, the chalice of meaning from which others may drink. For in truth, it was never curse alone. It was the call of the self, asking you to awaken, to remember, to carry consciously the mystery of what it means to feel everything, and yet to remain whole.